It's a great privilege to have the opportunity to speak before you this morning. Back a while ago, several of our brothers had spoken about their ministry and how they got to where they are today. So now it's my turn to do that, to kind of tell you what's happened to bring me to where I am right now. It was New Year's Eve, 1972. I was at the Legion Hall dance in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. I pulled the cigarettes out of my pocket and stuck them down a glass of McCarty's rum. I told the girl that I was with to find her own way home. She had family at the dance. I said, I'm going to change my life. And got up and walked out of the Legion Hall dance just before midnight. Exactly 1 month later, Delbert Bradley from Brownfield, Texas, who was doing mission work in Nova Scotia, Canada, baptized me into Christ. Exactly 1 year to that day, I placed membership at the Sunset Church of Christ and had been a student for one whole day in the Sunset School of Preaching. When I placed membership that night, a young lady came to the front of the church, Betty Donop, to meet this guy from Canada. So I made a date with her for Friday night. No sense wasting time. And she became my partner in the work that we would do in Canada. After we finished school here at Sunset and graduated then in February 1975, we went back to Nova Scotia, worked for about a year with George Mansfield in Halifax as we made plans to establish a new work. And then, of all things, on Halloween Eve, we moved into our house that we were trying to buy in Kentville, Nova Scotia. And Saturday night, had services Sunday morning in our living room as we began a work of establishing the church for the Lord in Nova Scotia. For over 20 years, we worked with that one congregation and helped it to grow up and become established. We raised 4 children on the mission field. They even speak the language, eh? When our kids had gotten to the age where they were ready to go to university, we decided that we would move to Texas and try and be closer to them and get them involved in Christian universities. So I took a job with a small congregation in Camp Wood, Texas, called the Nueces Canyon Church of Christ. When I went there, I agreed to stay for 2 years. One of the elders said, would you stay for 4? I said, well, unless I have to leave, I will. We spent 17 years with that congregation, and they still support my work here, and I'm totally supported by them. So we've had over 20 years together. Now, brother, what I'm saying is in over 40 years of preaching, I've worked with 2 churches. Okay? That was because I made a decision that New Year's Eve when I stuck my cigarettes into the glass of rum. I don't know if you've been there, but I tried to quit smoking lots of times. There's lots of times I've thrown away a good pack of smokes because I was going to quit. But I recall when I would do that, Chris, what I would do is I'd take 2 cigarettes out and I'd set them up on top of the refrigerator just in case, right? And I'd make this decision, I'm going to change, and I'd crumple up my cigarettes and I'd throw them away. But an hour later, I'm up feeling around the top of the fridge trying to find I never really made a heart decision. But that New Year's Eve, I knew things had to be different. So I didn't just make a decision for me. I made a decision for the Lord. And that changes everything in life. As a side note, I'm very excited to say that Sean Prather, who is now the evangelist at the Hermley Church, my son-in-law, who spent a lot of time with my daughters and ended up marrying one, is now preaching the gospel of Christ. Last night, he baptized his friend that these kids grew up with back in Camp Wood. And this young man who was baptized last evening called Sean or sent Sean a text message at 2 o'clock in the morning and said, "I'm ready. I'm ready." So last night he got himself up to Hermley, was baptized, and by Monday I expect he will be here at sunset. His question is, can I enroll now? What can I do? I'm ready to go. I don't want to go back. I want to make a total change. I can identify with that, right? You see, so you've got to make that kind of commitment. So hopefully the right people will be standing around come Monday morning if Reuben shows up, and you make sure that he's going to be involved in this program. So how do you get to stay on the field so long? Over 20 years in Nova Scotia, over 20 years in working with Camp Wood. Well, I consider it a balance. It's a balance of two fears. The fear of staying any longer and the fear of going somewhere new. Between those two things, we tend to stay where we were safe. Well, in all of my preaching and teaching, I've never had a preaching job. In my over 40 years, I've never had a job as a preacher. I was supported by the church so that I could have the time to do what God wanted me to do. But I never did have a job. That wasn't what was driving me. We went there to establish the church in a community that knew nothing about the Church of Christ. In fact, if we said we were the Church of Christ, they'd say, "Oh, you're the Mormons." And if I said, "We are the Church of Christ, but not the Church of Jesus Christ," they say, "Oh, you're a Mormon, but you don't want to be called a Mormon." So when we built our building, we put a sign out in the yard that said, "Jesus is Lord." And down the bottom of it, we put Romans 16:16, "The churches of Christ greet you," to try and establish an identity that would work for our community. We didn't go to the mission field to baptize people. We went to the mission field so the Lord would have a representative in a community where the church was unknown. And any baptisms that came, we thought were mercy drops given by God for the efforts that we had there. When you go, you need to go to wherever it is God calls you or puts you into that place. You go with a message to preach, and then you preach that message. You preach the message that God gives you. You be not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. It worked then, and it works now. But we're probably, over the next few days, going to hear lots of these political talks again. We thought it was all over with. And you're going to hear people talking about making America great again. And they are going to, I would assume, say something like, "We've got to get back to the basics. I'm here to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. We'll make America great again," and everybody will cheer. Because we know the foundational documents are good documents. What they say are a good foundation. And we've got to go back to that. The Word of God is a good document. The gospel given by Jesus Christ is exactly what people need. That's what we've got to preach and teach, unashamedly. Just go present the gospel of Jesus Christ again. You don't have to come up with a message. You don't have to come up with a new technique and a new approach. Just tell it like God gave it, right? Paul says, "Have you know, brethren, the gospel which was preached by me is not according to man. For I neither received it from men, nor was I taught it. I received it by a revelation from Jesus Christ." He would go on in Ephesians 3:3 and say that by revelation there was made known to me the mystery, as I wrote before in brief. And by referring to this, when you read, you can understand his insights into the mysteries of Christ. Now the point is this: it came from God. It's God's message. That's what we need. He would even say, I am amazed that you are so quickly deserting him who called you by the grace of Christ for a different gospel, which is not really another. Only there are some who are disturbing you and they want to distort the gospel of Christ. He says, even though we, that's the apostles or an angel from heaven, should preach unto you a gospel contrary to the one which we preach to you, let him be accursed, as I said before. So say I again now, if any man is teaching a different gospel, be damned. Because what God has given is exactly what the people need to hear. Now brethren, if you're not going to go and preach the truth, you've got nothing to say. Go home and just leave them alone, because they're better on their own than they are with error, or they are with something that's watered down and diluted to where it means nothing. You'll go and pour your heart and your life into trying to build a church, trying to teach the lost. And you'll have times when you say, is it worth it? Why should I bother? I can do better. I can get a bigger church, a better climate. You'll have all of those things that Satan's trying to raise up in your mind. I want you to know that your time of glory is not during this life. I want you to know that your point of reward is not here and now. You are called to serve, called to preach, called to teach. Do what God has called you to do. Your time will come. There will be for you a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will reward to those who love him and serve him when the time's right. But until that day comes, you just preach, teach, and serve, and do what God's called you to do. Paul writes to Timothy, 2 Timothy 4, I solemnly charge you in the presence of God and Christ Jesus, who is the judge of the living and the dead, preach the word! Preach the word! Preach the word! Be ready in season, out of season. Old Parker Henderson used to say, in season, out of season. That means you tell it to them when they want to hear it, and you tell it to them when they don't. Reprove, rebuke, and exhort with great patience and instruction. That's doctrine. Because the time's going to come when they will accumulate to themselves teachers in accordance to their own desires. They want to have their ears tickled. They'll find the person that'll say what they want to hear. But you preach the word? Jesus would put it this way. Let your light so shine before men in such a way that when they see your good works, they pat you on the back and say, man, you're a good preacher. Does your translation not read that way? You know what it says, right? You go out and let your light shine because your job is to be the light. Now, if you let your light shine, God is glorified. They look at your life, and they say, wow, isn't God a great God? Look at what God's doing here in that life. Because you're letting your light shine. Brethren, to stay in the mission field, all you got to do is be a light. Now, if the power went off in this room right now, I'd get a match. Somebody's probably got one. I could strike that, or a lighter, or a candle, and I could still teach my word. And that little light would be enough to let me see what I need to say. But if I was to light that match right now and hold it up in this room, would it look very bright to you? Wouldn't look very bright. But here's the truth, folks. The match or the light is the same brightness whether the room is light or dark. It's just that it's so much more effective when it's in the darkness. Why are we cursing the darkness around us? Why are we upset that the world's dark, that the world's evil, That's where our light is meant to shine. Here's where it's most effective. Don't complain. On the mission field, they don't believe in God. They don't honor the Word. They don't. It's why you're there. To be a light, to shine. In Philippians chapter 2, it says that we're to do, verse 14, we're to do all things without grumbling and disputing. Let me read that one again. Verse 15, that we may prove ourselves to be blameless, innocent children of God, above reproach, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world. Got a marginal reading on that one? The word lights? It's probably going to say something like luminaries. Or maybe your translation says stars. Here's something Texas has got going for it. Beautiful stars. Chris gets my property down there in Nueces Canyon. You get out in the pasture where there's no houses around and no lights. You look up at the sky at night and you can't help but go, wow! Isn't God a great God? Look at those stars shining in the darkness. Have you considered this? That you are to be the star shining in the darkness of the world? Could it be that God is up above, looking down upon the world, looking down upon the darkness, and from God's perspective, what does He see? He sees lights, stars, luminaries shining in the darkness. And just maybe God's looking at your life and saying, wow, isn't that a great life? See? Because we're shining in the darkness of the world. You can always be a light. You can always be a light. And that's what God's called us to do. Not to build churches, not to build schools, not to all of those things that men try to do. Just go into the darkness and let your light shine. Let God work with that. See? If you're going to go talk to people, you've got to earn the right to speak. People will listen if you earn the right to speak. I was asked one time, what do we need to do to evangelize Newfoundland? That's the 10th province on the eastern end of Nova Scotia. It's an island. It's somewhat isolated. It's very rough and tough. So they asked me, I was speaking at a lectureship in Canada one time, what do we do to evangelize Newfoundland? I said, somebody needs to buy a pair of boots and learn to fish. Because that's what you do in Newfoundland. When I went to Nueces Canyon, I bought some goats, learned how to tie barbed wire, and mend fences. Because that's what people down there do. So if you're going to be part of their life, you want to touch their life, you got to meet them where they are. Because the gospel's real. It's all about real life. It's real living. So you go to where the people really live and meet them there. And God will bless that for you. We went by Sunday night on the way home from Ropesville. We stopped at the Market Street to get some groceries, and I always like to talk to the checkout people. Great opportunity to encourage them. Not Sunday night, but back a while ago, I was at the checkout, and the girl said to me, how you doing? I said, pretty good for a dead man. She said, what? I said, yeah, I died. I said, they actually buried me. They did, yeah, I was buried and I came back to life again. What? Yeah, I became a Christian. I died to my old life. They buried me in the watery grave and raised me back up again. Oh! So Sunday night, we were getting our groceries, and this guy came to help carry my groceries out, and his name's Isaiah. I said, hey, Isaiah, man, I've read your book. What book? I said, the book of Isaiah. Man, you said some really cool. Do you know that you have a son named Meher Shalahazbanaz? What? So we began to talk for a few minutes about the book of Isaiah, Isaiah 53, the prophecies about Christ. I said, he wrote all that hundreds of years before Jesus ever was born. I didn't know that. I said, Isaiah, I'll carry those groceries out. I always like to do things, but I'll carry them. He said to me, if I carry them out, we can talk more about the book of Isaiah. I said, here you go. So I said, let me tell you about Cyrus. And I give him just the background of a little bit about Cyrus and the great prophecy that Isaiah had spoken. Hey, I'm giving that as an illustration of meeting people where they are. Didn't have to go knock his door or chase them down. God just put them right there in our life. That's the way to try and teach people, to try and help them. If you're going to work for the Lord, your greatest resource is going to be your family. They'll be your greatest blessing. God hopefully will bless you with children that will be in contact with more people in the classroom and school every day than you could ever possibly generate. So you bless your children. You work with your family. You raise that family up to honor God with their lives. You open your home to them, to their friends, and that will become a tremendous evangelistic tool. One of the teachers asked Rebecca's sister when she was a little girl, what does your daddy do? She said, well, my daddy fixes things. He helps people. The teacher said, oh, isn't your daddy a preacher? She said, well, yeah, he preaches every Sunday, but that's not what he does. He just helps people. And when she told me that, I thought I was so honored by that. See? Because she saw my life as a life that's touching the lives of other people. Not just preaching, going to church, worshiping God. That's just what we do. That's who we are. You see? It's not something that we're going to go make it happen. That's who we are. Your children will be your greatest responsibility, your greatest obligation, but your greatest aid. Work closely with them. You be diligent to present yourself approved unto God as a workman who needs not to be ashamed, handling accurately this precious word. To be diligent means to break a sweat. Now, old Richard Rogers, when he was here teaching, he said, if you want to be successful, 3 principles. Study hard, pray much, and steal from the best. You don't need a new gospel. You don't need a new approach. You don't need a new teaching, a better racket. You just need to teach the gospel of Jesus Christ. Teach the truth. Teach the church. Teach the church in all of her glory, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing. And God will bless that. And you will be a true evangelist of Jesus Christ. You be zealous for the good works that God has already prepared beforehand for you to walk in them. Ephesians 2 verse 10 and Titus 2:14 would tell us. When you feel discouraged and down and weak, broken, rejected, disappointed, bitter, angry, all of those things, they come because it's life. It's just the way life comes sometimes. But when they come, remember what Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, and 8 through 10. When he says, when I am weak, you can read there broken and discouraged and down. When I am weak, then am I strong. How can that be? It's because God's grace is sufficient. When I am weak in me, weak in self, then I can be strong in God. And it's like, as long as I am strong in self, I cannot be strong in the things of God. So thank God for the weakness. Thank God for the struggle. Thank God for the disappointments. because that's God's turn to pick you up and carry you through. It's God's turn to work in your life then. Paul says, no soldier in active service. When you go to the mission field, when you go to serve, to preach and teach, you're a soldier in active service. You're not going for the skiing. You're not going for the trophy buck. You're not going for the great time or the super weather. You're going to actively serve. It's not a time to debate, to argue, to question, to reason. When you get there in active service, is Danny Wilson here today? Danny? Talk to this man back here about what active service means. Here's a soldier for you, okay? And when you go in active service and you come up against a conflict or a struggle, you don't stop and start talking about, now, should I do this or shouldn't I do that? You trust your training. That's the time for the training to kick in. You don't even stop and think about it. You just do what you got to do because that's what you've been trained to do. Brethren, right now, you are getting the training. Right now, the very way you will react 10 years and 20 years from now will come from the things that are being poured into your mind this day. This is your time to be trained. And when you get out there facing the battle, when you're in the struggles and the difficulties, you won't have to stop and question, should I listen to the Word or not listen to the Word? Or debate or argue with it. The training will kick in. That's why these men are trying to pour God's Word into your heart and your life. You are either a missionary or a missionaria. We are either missionaries going with a mission for the cause of Christ, or we are the mission area where somebody needs to put within us the desire to go for the cause of Christ. May God richly bless you and Jesus give you a deep peace. Thank you.